All right, so what I want to do for this portion is to, sorry about the feedback there. So what I want to do for this portion is to make a web map that utilizes the data that we've just published and demonstrate how to turn off both the entire layer and individual layers within that layer. So, for example, in we'll just use my map service, and the assignment will be for you to create one for your own. So here's my USA population layer. I've got cities, interstates, and counties, and I'm going to add those to my leaflet map, and I want to show you how to create a control. It can be as a series of checkboxes, which often is in ArcMap, and some websites have checkboxes like that. Some websites, they'll just have a button that does, like it'll say cities, and you turn it on and it shows the cities. So we could do either one of those, but we're gonna look at those. Maybe what I should do to start off here is let's look at. This was last week's example with the WMS layers, and we'll work off of that one. I forgot if I ever uploaded this one. Let's make sure that I did. Looks like I did, because this says week 7. I think that's the same one. Let me. Sorry. Right click and say save link as. Just make sure this is the same. Oh yeah, we had that issue with the data. So I will go ahead and upload, because I forgot to take that out of there before. So I'm going to go ahead and upload this version that I have, and I'm gonna call it even. I'm gonna call it week CWM. So go ahead and change the name of this to week 8. Make sure that it works. Works great. And we'll upload that. So this should have done that during the break. That's my computer. CWM. Week 8. All right, so this is going to be the file that I'm going to work off of. So you can either follow along or work off it as well. But now that it's up there on Blackboard, example week 8, and it looks like this. Oops. Let me get rid of that. It looks like this. So it comes up the whole United States. It shows what was this other layer? It's got the weather, but underneath it, I think it was cropland that we loaded last week. What's that? We can look at the code and see, but if you want to download that, you can. If not, a bit smaller. So it's this data set right here, and this data set right here. It's Ag Croplands 2000. Maybe that's what you said. It's hard for me to hear in here. Okay. And then we added that little Gulf of Mexico layer down there from another data set. Right down there. And I mentioned that next week we would be we'd be changing this so that we could add elements to turn layers on and off. That's what we'd be doing. So let's start with checkboxes, because that's used often. So what I'm going to do is I think that HTML W3 W3C schools. Why is nothing working? Did they all? Does the internet not work? Huh. Is it just W3 schools that's out? I'm sure there's a jQuery checkbox. All right, so I just Googled jQuery checkbox because W3 schools is down. And this shows the HTML for, this is what W3 schools would have shown, is the HTML for a checkbox. So we're going to add a few checkboxes onto our page. I'm going to add them to the bottom of our page down here, but there's no reason that you couldn't put them up here. In fact, you could put them, you know, if you wanted to be extra fancy, you could put them on the map. But I'm going to put them down here. I'm just going to put 3 or 4 checkboxes right down the line right there. So to do that, I'm just going to copy this this code, because this is the code for a checkbox. Input type equals checkbox. And I'm going to put that in my HTML code in the footer. So here's the footer. This is where the div starts. This is where it ends. And I'm going to put 3 checkboxes for now under div ID footer. I'm going to have to assign those IDs eventually in order for them to respond to events that I want. Right now, I'm just going to check to see if it works. So I added them. I'm going to go back to the leaflet, refresh. I've got my 3 checkboxes, and they work like checkboxes. I don't really like how they're lined up like that, so I have a few choices to make them so that they are lined up top to bottom. So the first thing I'm going to do is just add a line of code a line of text in here that says layers, like that. And then after that, I can just use a div tag, because by default, a div tag will force a carriage return. Probably easier at this point to just copy and paste and get rid of the last one. So now I've got my layers, and I have 3 div tags that will force a carriage return in between each of those checkboxes. Finally, what I want to do is, instead of them being just hanging checkboxes, I want to put a little description of what each one is. So I could do something like, let's make one. I'll have the weather on all the time. So I'm not going to let the user change the weather, but I'll have the cropland, and I'll have the United States, the counties, sorry, population, which is a layer I haven't added yet. That's going to be my population, though. And maybe I'll move population down and say roads up here. I'll let them turn roads on and off. Okay, so I've got my cropland, my roads, and my populations that I can turn on and off. I'm going to refresh this page. And now it says layers, and it's got cropland, roads, and population there. They don't do anything yet, but they're there. I'm going to I'm going to write the code that will actually turn those layers on when it's on, and turn those layers off when they're off. All right, I'm going to start with cropland. I'm going to start with the cropland one first, because that one will be a little bit different, because I'm going to turn off the entire layer. So the layer is just either going to be off or the layer is going to be on. The other ones, I'm modifying one of the elements of that layer. So really, roads and population are in the same service, right? The way I published it. I'm talking about this map service I just created. So the interstates and the, maybe I should say interstates. So the interstates and the population are two different layers. And I'm going to turn them on and off individually. So I'm just going to assign each of these an ID. Maybe I could just call them the same thing as the layers named, because it might be easier to do in my head. I'll have to keep track of as much things. Equals. So now I've got cropland, interstates, and population as IDs. All right, so where I'm going right now is that I need to write some code so that the user, when they check cropland, it does something. So what's that called? It's an event, and then we're going to write the handler for that event. So one thing that I can do with jQuery is that I can look for any event for any checkbox. So I forgot. I think it's just like this, right? Any checkbox, in quotes. If it's an element of type that, I think that'll work. Maybe that won't work, but let's checkbox. Let's type checkbox. Not sure that'll work. It might need to put input. Yeah, go ahead. Okay, so I'm just going to create a new line underneath, after I've added all the legends, underneath that, before my thing that says part of template resizes. That's where I'm writing this. So before I get too far down this road, I want to make sure that it's actually going to work. So I'm going to go back and look at the documentation here real quick. Okay, look, it looks like I'm going to have to put input : checkbox. But this is just styling, so I don't want to do that. I mean, I don't need to do all that. What I just need to do is find all of the checkboxes on the page. I don't think this is going to work right now, but let's see what this says on. Okay. This is what it explains it right there. So this is going to get all of the checkboxes, input : checkbox, because the tag is actually an input tag. You know how we have div tags and we have other tags. So input checkbox will get all of the input checkboxes. And then .on will say, okay, when something happens, and we'll change this to change. So for now, what I'm going to do is I have to say comma function, because what I'm going to run this function when that checkbox changes. for now, let's just put an alert symbol. Like that. I mean, an alert sign. So I'm going to leave it like that. So I'll let everybody catch up if you're going slow. I'm going to make this a little bit bigger. So this looks like this. It's just what this code is saying is find all of the things that match this jQuery selector, and then assign an event handler to the change property. So anytime anybody changes the value in that, run this function. And right now it's just going to alert and say it changed. Now, I may not have the right name of the function or something, but we'll find out here in a second. There should. Right there. Good call. I think it actually put it in there for me and I deleted it for some reason. But yes. I'm going to open up the open up developer tools because I'll probably need it. Oh, okay. I'll look at that here real quick. So it is working. So that code works. So get your code into that state. These are all IDE tools. I'm not sure if that's and then these open. All right. So if you have this code in here and you refresh the page, it should be, all it should be doing right now is when you change any one of these values, it tells you that you changed it. It's not very exciting yet. All right. Now, there are more than one way. Sorry, there is more than one way to do this, but in my head, what I'm going to do is I'm just going to write a single function so that when it runs this function, it first has to find out a few things, right? Eventually, what I want to do is be turning layers on and off, right? So I need to find out which checkbox was actually checked. My guess is that information is contained in in one of the parameters that's passed to the function. So usually there's see if I can find the documentation on it. It doesn't really tell us in this one. One of the things that I usually like to do is to console log the events that are coming out of here. So if I put event here and change this to console.log and look at what's contained in this event, my guess is that one of the things that's contained in the event is the target. And so I'll be able to see that. That's what I'm going to do. Look at the event, log it in the console. Refresh the page. Now I check cropland, and I see this event that happens, and look, the target is one of the elements. So if I go to target, PQRS target, and then I can find the ID, I'm sure. Oops. Accept. It doesn't actually write ID out, but it says that the target is input cropland. I mean, input hashtag cropland. What I really want to get is that word cropland out of there. I want to know, there it is, ID. Is that just one of the top level? Yeah, that looks like the top level. See that attribute in there, ID? Let's see. So it looks like that's the same level as all of this other stuff. It's under target. Okay, cool. So if I go event.target.id, refresh the page. Oh, I shouldn't have gone so fast. But now see how it tells me which one. It tells me the ID of which one was clicked. So I'll go back to that for a second. So I'm looking. This is the information about the event. And the event.target, in other words, what target triggered this event, and I'm getting the ID of that. So I can use that ID now to do what? To turn off or on the layer that I want to turn on or off. The other thing that I want to know is, did the thing get turned off or did it get turned on? So I'm going to console.log this event again and see if, actually I'll just go event.target. See if there's an attribute that it's checked or unchecked. Refresh. So now when I click cropland on, okay, I've got my it's not letting me see it all. So I'm going to change this to just event. So it'll let me see everything. Cropland. There's the event. I'm pretty sure there's going to be an event that's called like checked or something. Maybe it'll be under target. Checked. True. So dot target dot checked. So now when I go to run this thing, I hit cropland and it says cropland true. Click it again, it says interstate's true. If I uncheck it again, it'll say interstate's false. Uncheck cropland false. So it's telling me which one was selected and whether or not it was turned off or on. So it's kind of like two different approaches that I'm thinking of in my head. One is that I could go and turn that layer, set the visibility to be visible or not visible based on this true or false. Or another thing that I could do is actually, anytime anybody checks one of these checkboxes, I could just check to see whether or not all of these are turned on and modify it. I don't, off the top of my head right now, I don't know which one's better. But with cropland, I'm thinking that it'd be easier just to like turn it off or on based on whether or not it's checked. So to do that, let's look and see if there's a way to set the visibility of a layer inside of Leaflet, because Leaflet's really where we need to do this. So we've got our cropland, and we need to turn it on, or we need to turn it off. So let's go to leaflet, the leaflet reference. We've got our layers. We can add it or we can remove it. Those would look like the only choices. Sorry, I just clicked on the general, the interface to iLayer. So every layer has the ability to be added or, well, it has a method, on add or on remove. It'd be nice not to have to remove the layer, to just hide the layer. There's got to be a way to do that. But if not, then we can add and remove it. It's not that hard. I'm just going to see if anybody has some code that might work. Looks like somebody has requested it. I don't know if it ever got added. Let's see if I don't see any documentation for it. But let's see if it works to just see if there's a layer.hide or layer.add. So our layer is called my WMS layer. So we have the ability to see it. So we've got my WMS layer. So let's go down here, and we need to write an if statement. Basically, at first, we just need to say if the target is equal to cropland, do something, right? So how would we write that if statement here? If this is the way to see if it's cropland, if equals cropland. Why do we say equals here? Yeah, it's assignment. Equals is comparison. Equal is assign. I mean, equals, just one equals assignment. Equals is comparison. So we're saying if the target ID is equal to cropland, then do this stuff. I'm going to put a comment in my code. If the checkbox was cropland, do the code below. Behind. That's not what I said. Oh, it. Okay. Do the code below. All right. So that's what this is going to do. So now we need to say we need to do what? Well, first thing we need to do is to find out whether they wanted to turn the layer on or whether they wanted to turn it off. So what's another if statement? If it equals true, then I'm just going to put a comment here. Turn layer on, and I'm going to put an else statement and say turn layer off. So right here, we're turning our layer on. The code. I'll put code to turn layer off. Code to turn layer off. So if it's true, we should all agree that usually putting a checkbox means that layer is going to go on. If it's off, then we're going to say, okay, don't add that layer, or take that layer off. So first I'm going to test to see if that layer.show works. So that layer is called my WMS layer. I'm going to say show for this. And it may be that we actually have to remove it from the map. Okay, but this may work. Show hide. Now, the way that our code's written right now is that the map layer is turned on by default. So the first check isn't gonna, we shouldn't expect it to do anything. If I refresh this page, that's not gonna do anything. My WMS layer dot show is not a function. Yeah, so that was a request for a feature. It wasn't there, doesn't exist. We need to actually do it the way that OpenLayer says to do it and do add layer and remove layer. Okay. So we need to change these. And instead of being functions of the WMS layer, they are functions of the map itself. So we have access to the map. It's called map. So we'll just go map.remove layer and put in WMS layer. Just for now, I'm going to comment this out. I'm not going to do that, and you'll see why here in a second. So right now, the first time I check it and I turn it to true, nothing's going to happen. Hopefully, when I check it again, it's going to do this, and it's going to work. So let's see what happens. Refresh the page. Check cropland, nothing happens. I uncheck it, there goes croplands. Check it again, doesn't exist. All right, now why, can anybody think of why I can't just do this? What's going to happen? You're not going to see any change, but think about what's happening when I check this cropland box right now. What's just happened when I checked that box? It ran this code. It added the layer. Now when I run this, when I check this again, it does disappear. Not every web mapping API would do that. So this is working fine. However, I do know some web mapping APIs that would actually add another copy, so there'd be two there. Okay. All right. How could we do, if we did notice that problem, how could we overcome that? Well, what we could do is, what I would suggest we do, if we want that layer on by default, we could just simply change that value to true at the beginning, and it would check that box as we start it up. See how it checks that box? So now it's checked by default, and we go to town on it. Okay. I'm sorry, Heather, can you speak up? Yep. I'll leave it on the code there for a second. So now we've pretty much written the code. Like if we want to turn a whole service off by itself, we could do that with this checkbox. Okay. One of the issues with this code, and one of the reasons why you might want to do it the other way that I was thinking of, which we're not going to demonstrate today, but is that notice what happens when I check cropland on. So now reload the page. Cropland is below the weather. When I uncheck cropland and add it back, now it's above the weather. So if that's an issue, the way to solve that would be to re-add every layer, or to somehow shift around the layer order. I don't know if by default, I don't think they have a way to do that. Let's see. See if we search leaflet, change layer. Layer dot bring to front, layer dot bring to back. I would think that the easier way to do it would just be to get rid of everything. Every time somebody checks a box, you get rid of everything and you add the layers back that you want to be checked. You'll see that we only really have this problem with WMS layers. When the last thing I want to do today is add this layer in my my USA population map layer. So we're going to use this URL here, and we're just going to modify this this dynamic layer that I created before. We're going to modify that so that it adds that data instead. So I'm gonna paste over this URL. Okay. So now it's going to be the USA population data, and I do have to change right here where it says layers. I have to change this to 1 and 2. Why would I do that? Anybody remember from last week? What were layers 15 and 16? Yeah, it was specific to coastal resilience. Does this map service even have a 15 or 16? No, it just has a 0, 1, and 2. And I'm just going to ignore 0 for now. I'm just going to turn on layer 1 and layer 2. I'm going to up the opacity to 1. Remember, we didn't know exactly what this was used for, but it was necessary. Still not sure whether it's necessary or not. Okay, so it's adding that. Where does it add that? Oh, this is where it's adding it to. One thing that I need to do is actually modify this code a little bit. I need to establish a variable. If I'm going to be turning on and off the layers, I need to establish a variable so that I can access it later. So I'm going to call this USA map or USA layer, and then I'm going to add USA layer to the map. If I don't do this, I don't have any connection to the layer once it's created. So I have to get a reference to it so that I can mess with it later. All right. Now at this point, I should be able to see it when I refresh the map. However, I won't be able to see it until I turn off this other croplands layer. I don't see it. Oh, there it goes. It's just because our server is so slow. We have all these services running. So I would suggest that we delete some of our services. I'll delete the ones I've created. But notice that once I get it once, it goes pretty quick. Even if I zoom in, well, 1, 2, yeah, there it goes. It's a little bit faster than the very first time because ArcGIS started and it's there. It's still not as fast as that other layer because it's running on better hardware, for sure. But we've added it. All right, so we want to be able to turn off individually load the interstates and the population. We're like maybe I can give this computer more RAM. So maybe I'll do that because this is really going slow. It will probably go a little faster if we weren't all accessing it at the same time, but since we are. Okay, so that's that. I want to be able to turn these two layers on and off individually. Okay. So the first thing I need to do is find out, in our case, if they've selected interstates or population, then then we're good, right? I mean, not good, but interstates and population are both not cropland. So we can do something when interstates shows up or population shows up. So we could put another if statement here. But we could also just put an else statement, I guess what I'm trying to say. Right? Because there's nothing else in the list. It might be better to use an if statement in this case, because what if we add more layers? So we'll have another thing to do. So I've got some if statement here. If, I'm just going to copy this one. I'm going to copy it twice. So if the target is, what's the other one? Interstates. Do this. Interstate. Forgot what I put. Interstates. And then if it's population, do this. All right. But what is this? We don't know what it needs to do yet, because it's not as simple as turning a layer on or off. We actually need to find out what we need to put there. So to do this, we actually need to go to the ESRI leaflet page, because this is an ESRI layer, and we have to use the code that ESRI came up with. So go to the API reference here, and then go under Dynamic Map Layer. And under Dynamic Map Layer, we can see that one of the methods is to set the layers. Set layers, right there. Set layers. So it's just an array of numbers that indicate the layer IDs. Just to kind of get, I mean, that may not make a whole lot of sense right now, but just to kind of get you the idea here, what we're going to do is copy this function right here and put it inside of interstates. And I'm going to make a ID list that's just going to have 0, 1, 2. Sorry. It's just going to have 2 in it. So this is an array because it's in brackets, and it just has 2 in it. So in other words, when this if statement gets run, it's going to change. Oh, I gotta say USA layer dot. So now, if this if statement runs, in other words, if the user checks on or off the interstates, it's going to run this line of code right here, and we'll see what it does. Going to go back to here, refresh the page. Okay, now if I check this box, it's going to run that code. And do you see how it turned off the interstates? Now that's not what we actually want it to do, because I checked the button and it turned off the interstates. That's the opposite of what we wanted it to do. But why did it do that? Well, this set layers modifies this layers parameter here, and it changes it from 1, 2 to just 2. Why does that turn the layer off? 1 and 2 were layers 1 and 2, which if we go over here, this was layer 0, the cities, which we're not even adding. Layer 1 was the interstates. Layer 2 was the counties. I'll show you something else maybe that'll drive this point home a little bit further. So what if I put 0, 1, 2? Now, anybody guess what's going to happen? When I check this box, it's going to run that code. It's going to show all the layers. So now we're also seeing the cities layer. So this line of code basically allows us to change which layers are on by providing the number for the layer. So if I only want layer 2 on, I go like that. So now when I check this, going back to before, I get rid of the cities. If I go into network, you'll see these bounding this thing. So if I open this in a new tab, so you'll see that this, well, it didn't actually do that. I was trying to see if it would. There it is. That's what I need. I was looking at the response. Still the response. It's hard to capture the request. That's it. Open link in new tab. What's showing me? Okay, so right here, I'm going to hover over it. This is the actual request. See where it says layers show percent 3A2. This is encoded, but this is the 2 brackets with the 2 in between it. So that's where it's making the request to change the layer. Actually, I think what I need to do is say copy link address and then paste it, then change this to HTML. This will work. There's really no reason to do what I'm doing except for to kind of show what's going on. So you see how this extent is the exact same thing that was requested by the map. Of course, now it's smaller, but this was an earlier request. And you can see that the layers, the request that it made was to just show layer 2. Okay. I could change this to 1, 2, 3, and get it refreshed, and I'll get everything. I don't know why. Oh, it's 0, 1, 2. It's 0 based. 0, comma. So now I get the cities. So leaflets handling, or ESRI leaflets handling all the code to go up and get this information. Okay. So what this implies is if I hand it empty one, let's see what it does. So with an ESRI layer, it does look like we can make it so that nope. So if you don't put anything in there, it just puts everything. Let's see if we go -1. I'm just experimenting now. Bam. Okay, that works. So -1 in the list of layers turns everything off. So with the ESRI data set, it does look like we don't have to actually add or subtract it. We could put -1 and it would turn all the layers off, which is what we need to do. Okay. So now the challenge is to write all the logic in here that would take our USA layer and put the right numbers here. In other words, if interstates is turned on, but population is turned off, this needs to be just 2, because that's population is layer 2. If they're both turned on, this needs to be 2, 3. If they're both turned off, this needs to be -1. So we need to come up with some way to make that happen. And it's a little bit complicated. In other words, it's not some skill that you would have right out of the box here. Okay, but there are a few ways to tackle it, but it's getting kind of late, so maybe I'll demonstrate that part next week. But if anybody wants to work ahead, that's something to do. As far as the assignment for today, what I want you to do is, instead of using my data, I want you to put your data on here, and I do want you to get to a point where you have a checkbox and you can turn that entire layer on or off. Okay? So, not the individual layers, but the layer itself. So in other words, we could make this so that it just did. So now if I load this, it's just going to turn the entire layer off. I don't know why that didn't work. Oh, because I put the wrong layer there. USA layer. So now that turns off the entire layer individually. Okay. So next week we'll finish this this method up of getting these. So the thing that makes this challenging is that all we know when somebody clicks is which one they clicked and whether or not it's on or off. But in order to solve this problem, we need to actually know the value for both. So we could keep track of it somehow. We could keep track of it somehow, or we could actually just ask, is population checked? And that's actually pretty easy to do, right? I mean, we already asked things about things before. Here, let me just demonstrate this real quick, and then I'll answer questions. So if I go like this, and I said, how do I get something by ID? Is it dot, hashtag, or just nothing? Hashtag. Right? So here I can go population. Checked. Let's see if this works. I don't know if that'll work. But there is a way to get the actual value undefined. That doesn't work. Is it called population? Anyway, there is got to be an attribute in there somewhere that tells me whether or not it's checked or not. But in order to solve this problem, I need to know what the value of population is, so that I can put both these values in there, or none of the values. So I need to know all of the checkboxes, not just that one. Okay. I'm going to go ahead and end it there for today, and we'll finish this problem up. But the homework for today is add your own layer in there and get it to turn off and on by using a checkbox. All right. So we'll do what we did last week. You guys in Hattiesburg can go, and I'll answer questions later. And then here, I'm willing to answer any of the questions that people have as they've been working through it. All right. So have a good night.
You too. Thank you.
All right. Well, I'm just going to go ahead and stop the video here.